All right, the White House now says the military did, in fact, conduct a second strike on a suspected drug boat back in September, but the White House is insisting that it was legal. It is the latest statement in the administration's evolving account of this military strike, and it comes as multiple lawmakers from both sides of the aisle say it could amount to a war crime. The defense secretary and the White House are defending the naval admiral who they say ordered the attack. They argue it was well within his authority. So I want to bring in CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, so the defense secretary put out a tweet yesterday on X saying that he is supportive of the admiral who carried out that second strike. But of course, the question has to do with who gave the order. So take us through what's been alleged by the Washington Post and what the White House is now saying about that strike, because earlier this week and last week, the Pentagon spokesperson, Sean Parnell, indicated that everything that was being reported was fake news.
Right. Well, evolving is a very good way to describe that, Vlad, because first it was a question of whether a second strike took place. We got confirmation from the White House yesterday that, yes, it had. Now, in terms of who ordered the strike, ultimately that comes under Secretary Hegseth's instruction as far as an overarching order. But as he said, it was Admiral Mitch Brady who actually is in charge of Special Operations Command, who would have had that second strike order. And then again, he said that he stands by it. Now, where it gets a little bit convoluted there is, yeah, there he goes. He's calling him an American hero, Admiral Mitch Brady. Where it gets a little bit more convoluted here is the legality of the strike itself. So under the laws of armed conflict, Geneva Conventions, it's prohibited to attack shipwrecked combatants, surrendering personnel, or anybody incapacitated. The White House argues it wasn't necessarily to go back and kill the shipwrecked personnel there, but the boat itself, the craft itself, because it was a threat to the United States. Earlier this morning, former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales told CBS Mornings why it matters.
The reason it matters is because how we treat people that are helpless, that are defenseless, particularly in an armed conflict, we care about it. Why? Because someday we're going to have soldiers in that situation where they're helpless, they're defenseless. We want them to be protected by rules of engagement. And so the notion that Secretary Hegseth said recently about, we don't care, we want to be unshackled by rules of engagement, I think is extremely dangerous. Rules of engagement exist in large part to protect our soldiers in the event they find themselves in a situation where they're at the mercy of an adversary.
So that's where it becomes important, not only the protection of U.S. personnel around the world, but also to the people who may be responsible for ordering that strike, including Admiral Bradley himself.
And so, Charlie, let me ask you just one quick question about where you are reporting from right now. You're reporting from our bureau in Washington. I know that the Pentagon held a briefing yesterday for those outlets who agreed to these I guess these rules that the Pentagon has put in place for reporting. And it's just sort of striking to me that this is all happening where you and the members of the press that hold the Pentagon and the government accountable are not able to be there and ask questions.
Yeah, well, Vlad, first of all, full transparency, we put a request in, I, myself, and my colleagues put a request in to attend that briefing or gaggle, however it was described, and we were told in no uncertain terms, no, it was only the credentialed media, which is pretty extraordinary because the credentialed media are the new team that's in there. In terms of us trying to get this information, we're going around. There are different ways. What's happening right now is happening in a place called Southcom or Southern Command. That's not inside the Pentagon. There is representation there. What happens in the Middle East, it's CENTCOM. What happens in Indo-PACOM, Indochina, these are different combatant commands, and they all have representatives. So we're doing a lot more work over the phone. But a lot of the legwork that we used to do at the Pentagon, it's become a lot more difficult essentially to try to get to the kernel of that, especially when we're talking about a story like this, which is contentious, and you really need to have multiple sources in order to get the information out.
Yeah, important context there for our viewers to understand. Charlie, thank you very much for doing the work that you do. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right, CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi is joining me once again this morning to talk more about this. Olivia, the White House is seemingly trying to shift the blame away from Secretary Hegseth. In other words, and we talked about this in the last hour, that tweet seems to support the admiral who was responsible for that operation. But in saying that he supports the admiral, the Secretary of Defense is turning the attention away from him as the ultimate decision maker to the admiral, the man who reports to him.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, Vlad. I mean, when the Secretary of Defense tweets something like that or posts something like that on X, we take notice because he seemed to be pointing the attention to Admiral Bradley, saying he was the one who made this decision to have that second strike, and he stands behind him 100%. The part we talked about and underlined specifically in the last hour was Secretary Hegseth saying, I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made, especially on that September 2nd mission. And of course, as we've been talking about these Venezuelan strikes, the point that Secretary Hegseth has continued to make is that they are lethal and effective. Those are two things that him and the president have agreed upon and talked about consistently. So this idea that Admiral Bradley is acting on his right is quite notable, Vlad.
So, Olivia, before you go, I want to ask you, I didn't get a chance to get to this in the last hour, about the former president of Honduras, which has been released from prison. What's striking to me, and I think a lot of people who, as you and I know, people are not always in the weeds on the details of what's happening in government, but the big headlines, in other words, the president is trying to prevent drugs from entering the country. People are aware of that. So explain to people why the president of the United States would want to pardon a man who was convicted of drug trafficking into the United States, i.e. the former president of Honduras.
That's a good question. The former president of Honduras was released from prison yesterday. We just found that out on the Bureau of Prisons website. He was pardoned by President Trump because this White House says he was over-prosecuted during the Biden administration. And he was prosecuted on several charges. It was a 45-year sentence on trafficking firearms and also drug trafficking into the U.S., specifically cocaine. So quite notable there that as the White House is waging this campaign in Venezuela for bringing drugs into the U.S., they are pardoning the former Honduran president for similar charges, seemingly. But they do say he was over-prosecuted by the Biden administration. We should note the judge in that case said that, the Levitt says that the charges on over-prosecution under the Biden administration were part of corruption. So therefore, this White House says that he is free of those charges. He is now walking free. The family has said that, but certainly quite a notable change between those two countries and those two leaders.
Yeah, notable is one word. Olivia, thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it.